Hey, ultimate music theory teachers, welcome. How do you develop chord fluency? That's a great question. In fact, what is chord fluency and how do you learn it? I'm Glory St. Germain from Ultimate Music Theory, and my very special guest is Bradley Sowash, and he's about to reveal how you can learn to construct chords and move beyond music theory worksheets to interpret chord symbols and identify harmonies. Wow, that sounds super intriguing. Welcome, Bradley.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here, Glory.
Well, Bradley Sowash is a multi-instrumentalist, a composer, an educator, known for his innovative online group jazz piano classes, which is so cool, widely acclaimed keyboard improvisation books, and he's the co-founder of 88 Creative Keys. Bradley and I first met in Texas, I believe, at a presentation that him and I were both doing at a conference, and it was so great to meet you there, Bradley. Thanks for joining us.
Now, yeah, I enjoyed hanging with you in Texas, and now I'll get to meet your buddies.
Yeah, for sure. I want to give a shout out to our viewers today, too. Bradley's in Ohio, right, Bradley?
Correct.
And even though we met in Texas, I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. So just go ahead and share with us where you're from. I do see we've got some viewers popping on the call today. So I want to say welcome to Faye and Ivy. She's all the way from Hong Kong, and Jean. So welcome here. I believe that as music educators, we never stop learning. And I think all music teachers agree that when we're really trying to think about how we can develop chord fluency, there's sort of some questions we have. So what is chord fluency, Bradley?
Well, that's a term that I coined to describe instant ability to play any chord in any inversion in any context.
Wow.
In my interviews for classes, I would often say how familiar you are with chords. Oh yeah, I've got my chords down.
Right.
Okay, so what is a C major 7? Let's see, C, E, G, B, and so that's not fluency, that's construction. And that's all right. Well, let's play all the major 7s right in a row. Or let's play this lead sheet. Fluency is to play in a chord instantly without thought.
Wow. And so they often learn, as you said, the theory of how to construct the chords, but may not have really chord fluency. So what's the first step?
Well, the first step is to think about constructing the chords and to know what they are, of course. And to build that fluency, that comes after awareness of the chords. So I would just propose that there are 2 ways to teach chords, and what the easiest way to approach it is through, in my view, through a scale. Okay. So I call that skipping horizontally. Let's take a C major scale. Of course, then we can think about every other note. C, skip the D, E, G, and then I like to teach chords originally diatonically, which means in the key. So let's now skip starting on the D chord, D, skip to F, skip to A, so that we're learning the chords within a key rather than chromatic or all this huge collection of chords, because most tunes, most of the chords in most tunes are in a key. So we start diatonically and horizontally. But then, and this is an important flip, then we think about constructing chords vertically, meaning stacking thirds. You hear jazz musicians talk a lot about stacking on extra thirds, right? To get those 11s and 13s and 9s and everything. And so I usually like to use a piece of paper or an actual manipulative that has note names on it. Probably many teachers have, note dice or something like that. What I use is a little thing I invented here called the Chord Stacker. So cool. We talk about C, E, G, but then we think vertically. Can we, without referring to the scale, say C chord, C, E, G, D, F, A? And of course, there's chromatic notes as well, F sharp and things like that when you need those chords. So by physically manipulating these on the Chord Stacker, there's a real world reinforcement of building the chords that is somewhere between thinking it through and writing it down and actually working it. And then you transfer that to the keyboard.
I really, really like the chord stacker. I just think that's such an awesome idea. And, as our teachers are joining us, I'm really curious to say, do you use chords? Like, how do you teach chords with your students? Because that's a big thing. Sometimes we just want to teach the music, but I think if you lay down the foundation, I mean, you're all about improvising and, composing. So I think that's like really, everyone needs to do that, whether you're just reading it or not. We have a question here from David. He says, how many chords must you truly know to play the majority of songs? And we have Get Fong here from Singapore, who wants to say hi to you. Raylene is from Okotoks, Alberta. And so, wow, we've got some great comments coming in. So I know we talked before we came on live, Bradley, about sort of the 3 essentials for every lesson. Can you share with us what would those be? So we're teachers now. What are the 3 essentials for every lesson?
So I think that every lesson includes a little bit of scales, a little bit of chord drills, chords separate from music, drilling of chords, and I can show a few here. Just a chord version of scales, if you will. And then chords and scales together, but creatively. And I call that scaling the chords, where one hand is playing the chords and the other hand is playing the scales, but in a more random way, in a more improvised way. Because the reason that's important is scales build key awareness and technique, and the chords build chord awareness and chord fluency. But that last step makes them real world, puts them together in a way that you're actually going to use and makes the theory relevant to actual music making.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes we, as music teachers, we think, technique, like who wants to play scales and who wants to play their triads and their dominant 7th chords and so on. But when you're teaching it the way you are, you're presenting it in such an intriguing way that you're like, well, wait a minute, if I learn this, look how much better I can play and how I can start to improvise on that, my favorite melody, but I can just add chords below it. I mean, it opens up the whole, coloring box of multiple colors. What is sort of the best way that you like to teach chords?
Well, I would originally start with the construction, and then we go to actually putting them to the keyboard. And I want to answer that question earlier. How many chords do you need? The answer kind of depends on what kind of music you make.
Right.
So I play every other Tuesday mandolin in an Irish jam session just for fun, and my daughter plays guitar. And to play Irish traditional music, you need about 6 chords.
Okay.
That's probably the simplest harmonic environment I've ever worked in part because the melody is very elaborate, and if you have both, of course, it gets kind of overwhelming.
Right.
So, and then if you're playing rock and roll or folk songs, you probably should know all your major and minor triads.
Yes.
Right. And if you're getting into the jazz world, it's really rare to see a triad or 3-note chord. Jazz has always got at least 4 notes in the chord, so that ramps it up. But still, there's only 5 common jazz chords that are essential. I can list those. You're like major 7, minor 7, minor 7 flat 5, and diminished 7. That's the bulk of what you're going to see, and the rest you can figure out.
Yeah.
And of course, it'd be great to know them in all keys, and that's what everybody always says: learn all your chords in every key. But I've been doing this for a long time, like 40 years, and I have to admit I do not play equally well in all keys.
Right. So
it's a lifelong pursuit. So I can't give you a hard finite number, but if I had to pin it down, I'd say if you're playing in a triad environment or simpler tunes, you probably need 24 chords. Let's go with that.
That gets a little scary here. One of the questions, yes, that was David's question, is how many chords do you truly need to play the majority? Said, do you have to be able to hear music to be a good player? So
you mean hear it in your head? I think
I'm guessing yes.
Yeah. It helps to have a musical imagination. Mm-hmm. The trick is for most people is not hearing the music. It's if you, right before you fall asleep at night, try to imagine a sound score, a soundtrack You know, if you're showering, find yourself humming a tune you don't know. I think it's pretty easy to locate the musicality in your brain. The trick is finding those notes on your instruments.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think music theory makes that possible. It's because it's not just playing by ear unless you have a genius ear. It's the music theory function is to actually reduce the number of note possibilities. Well, I'm in this key and I'm on this chord. I bet it's something like this.
Right. Yeah. And how do you help, like, what can we do to help our students move beyond the music theory worksheets and being able to interpret the chord symbols and identifying all those underlining harmonies?
Okay. So that I would start that with there's two ways to get at it. One is to compare the qualities of chords in a key. Mm-hmm. So if I play a C chord here, we can hear its happy majorness. We can go to our next chord, you know, D minor, DFA. We can maybe hear that's a little sadder or minor. However, a lot of people find that all the chords in a major key seem to them happy. Let me just run that. They all sound great. They must all be major. You're hearing the tonality. So the other way then to if it's difficult to hear the quality of the chords that naturally occur in a key is to play around with what it is that makes the chord quality change. Mostly that's the third. So if we listen to C and we listen to D minor, but it doesn't C minor to us, then we play with the third. Oh, that's D major. Oh, now I hear the minor. So we could do the same thing with the jazz chords. I could show a little exercise on that. This is one way to quickly get to a chord you're not sure about, and this works really well for some people. So I'm just going to take a C major 7 without really describing why that's a major 7. I'll use a triangle to save space. C, E, G, B, right? And if we turn that into a 7 chord or a dominant chord, what changed? The B went down. So now we have a C7. Let's change that into a C minor 7. What changed? The E went down a half step. Let's change this into a C minor 7 flat 5 or half diminished. Let me catch up on my chords here. Okay. And what happened here was the 5th went down, and the last commonly used jazz chord, the 3rd went down. Let's see, did I do this right? Whoops, C, E flat. And the, sorry, this went down here. Okay, so let me play these. C, E, G, B. We're lower the 7th. There's our 7th chord. We're lower the 3rd. There's our C minor 7. Let's lower the 5th. And for the C diminished 7, let's lower the 7. So you have those 5 chords. And that's one way by sort of realizing how all the chords within the same root relate to each other. That's one way to quickly get at the chord that you need to find that's helpful. And then there's drills to reinforce that.
And I think when you map it out like that, Bradley, you make it so simple, like just watching you do that progression. And when you learn that way, I think it's easier for students. It's not so overwhelming. It's simply one note, play it, hear it, see it, understand it. Like the light bulb kind of goes on for them, even as a young student. I mean, if you're teaching, kids, I mean, I think you're really preparing them for mastery when you can give them these tools early. Like you don't have to wait until you're, done your, level 8 piano to go back and start studying chords. This is something you can do right away, right?
Right. And that's why I'm actually not a fan of going deep into the construction, such as counting half steps between chord tones.
Yeah.
That comes later. Originally you just want, how did I first learn chords? I just had a chord chart behind my piano that had little keyboard diagrams with dots on it. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I was just copying those chords, and then when I could play them and understood them a little bit, I wanted to know more about it. So I think initially the quick shortcuts. Let me just say this. It takes a good teacher, and maybe I'm patting my own back, but one thing I hear a lot is that if I have a knack for teaching, it's the ability to break down complex ideas into simple, playable, bite-sized tips.
Absolutely. And I think that's really the key. And like you, Bradley, I'm not a fan of counting a bunch of, half steps between chords. I'm like, well, this is a major third. Here's a perfect fifth. And, here's your minor seventh, whatever. And then constructing it it is a lot easier. I know earlier you mentioned talking about horizontal and vertical. So could you just elaborate, like, what do you mean horizontal and vertical chord construction?
Well, it applies to improvisation too. I guess what I'm talking about is, let's just look at a horizontal environment here on my chord stacker.
Okay.
Because we're thinking about a scale, I'll take away the D and I'll take away the F and I'll take away the A.
Bradley, can you show us a little higher? There we go. Okay.
Yeah, I just had to work it there a little bit. So now I've taken away notes from my scale by skipping, and I've created a C major 7.
Right.
So I'm thinking horizontally, meaning I'm thinking in context of a scale.
Okay, got it.
So vertically, it says, okay, what do we want to do? Let's make an E minor 7. Okay, so actually probably be quicker to. E minor 7. I just happen to pick up the D, and I know that's the 7. So that's kind of a cheat there. And I'll borrow this G, and I'm going to need a B. Let's see if I have here's a B. So now I thought not so much about the scale, but I stacked thirds.
Right.
And this is more like, if you think about it, vertical is how chords are written in music notation. They are literally vertical. Yes. So I think you start with scales and keys, but then you think about building them up from the root by skipping thirds or stacking thirds.
Mm-hmm. And I think the more ways too that we are engaging in education through visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, when we engage in all three modalities, we actually learn faster. So by using those blocks, you get that tactile and you go, okay, I'm stacking these, I'm understanding. It's just another way of presenting them. So I really like that. I think it's a great visual aid for your students.
Thank you. Hey, let me show you another horizontal vertical way that I think about that. Does that work for you?
Yeah, so I like it.
When I improvise, and one of the things I teach my students is that you can improvise vertically or horizontally. And what that means is that horizontally, you're really thinking a lot about scales. Mm-hmm. And when you're improvising vertically, you're thinking about chords. And of course, the goal here is to do some kind of mix of both. This would make a good jazz solo. So conceptually, let me show this. I'll show a very scale-based improvisation, then a very chord-based improvisation, and then a mix. And this is a way to think. So I'm just going to pick C major 7, F major 7. So here's the background: C major 7, F major 7. Now, if I'm going to play more of a scale-based or horizontal approach to that, I'm going to wiggle around on the C major scale. Something like that. I'm thinking just about what notes are in C and working them. The other approach is to think about the chord tones, and that's what I think vertically. What are the actual notes in those chords? So I'll only play in my right hand the same chord tones that are in my left. So the right hand is playing broken chords, and the left hand is playing block chords. And then you really actually want to mix and match those. So something like chord tone, chord, scale, chord tone, mixing and matching.
That's it, Bradley. We just all want you just to play. I'm just rocking over here, loving this music so much. I see a lot of comments coming in and a lot of hearts floating up here saying, wow, we just want to listen to the music. And, ultimately, that's really what it's all about. Like, when you have the foundation of learning the way that you're presenting this, which is fantastic, it just makes you want to learn more and play. We've got people here. Sheila's in from Niverville, Manitoba. Diana says, really good explanation, Brad. Thank you. David asks, can you play most songs in one octave? That's a good question.
The melodies rarely stray from an octave. And one of the largest spanning songs the two that come to mind is Over the Rainbow, right? Starts on an octave.
Right.
And another one is, right? But that's actually probably about the extreme range of a tune. So many tunes fit in a little bit on a piano, an extended 5-finger position. Not too many fit in that 5-finger position, C, D, E, F, G. But if you just add an A on either end or a G, you're going to fit it in. So
That's very cool.
So the chord fluency is not just for pianists. It is the key to any improvising, or it opens so many doors to creativity. The only difference is a piano player can play all the notes of a chord at once, and everybody else plays them one at a time. But yeah, if you're not practicing broken chords on your monophonic instrument, you're missing a whole world that's going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. One of the questions that came in, Bradley, is which is better to learn guitar and then piano, or piano and then guitar?
Okay. The guitar is interesting because it's one of the fastest wins initially. You can have quick results with a guitar. My daughter took guitar lessons. She's now a semi-pro guitarist, singer-songwriter, and she came home from her first guitar lesson and said, look, I can play Sweet Home Alabama. She learned C and G chords.
Yeah.
But the other end of that is the guitar is incredibly hard when you start getting past those chords. So I'd say it's the easiest instrument to start, much harder than piano to get satisfying solo results.
Right.
The other way to approach that is, as you know, Glory, the piano is such a great primary instrument because you can see the theory right in front of your fingers.
Yes.
So I guess, why do you have to pick? Just do them both.
Yeah, I like that. Just do them both. So we kind of want to think about how do you explain primary chords? So if we just want to we've been talking about all these sevenths and everything, but how would you just explain just the primary chords?
Thank you. That's a question I like. The back to the question about how many chords do you need to know? Of course, the 1, 4, and 5 chord are the primary chords, and there are so many tunes that you can harmonize with just those. In fact, most simpler tunes, most nursery rhymes, folk songs, easy jazz tunes like Saints Go Marching In, and the list goes on. So those are especially useful, and it's good to be able to hear them as well as construct them.
Right.
And so I use a little. I'm kind of known for my rhymes and acronyms, and so how I say this is that 1 is done, 4 once more, 5 is alive, and 6 is in the mix. Let me break that down. If we're in the key of C, you can hear how the tonic chord or the 1 chord is done. The tune has ended. It seems like a home note. Let me play the 5 chord or the G chord, and I'm going to put it in a position in inversion that has the B on top to make this exaggerate a little bit. We can hear that restless quality. We can have its desire to go somewhere. So 5 is alive. It wants to give. It wants to go. And 4 is kind of like that, but not as strong. 4 once more. So here's C chord, home. 1 is done. 4 once more. It's gonna go somewhere. 5, oh, it's downright alive. And then more and more, especially in rock tunes since about the 80s, you're gonna find the 6 chord or A minor. So I just say 6 is in the mix. So let's do a 1, 5, 6, 4. 1, here's that 5 alive chord. And here's that 6 is in the mix. And here's that 4 that wants to move. And that's, I know that's Let It Be and Sweet Country Roads, I think. And anyways, 30 songs that use that progression alone. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's so much fun, and I think it just is such an awakening because so many times music educators, and I know when we were in Texas, my friend Lorene was there. She's also a piano teacher. And we talked about how very often, depending on how your music lessons are with yourself as a young student, I was classically trained and everything was in a box and you played what was written on the page. So to explore, was a little more scary for me. And I think it's so important for teachers to take this step steps so they can learn, so that they're more comfortable in teaching all of these, opportunities for their students. Because if we as educators are not a master improvisation teacher such as yourself, how can we help our students recognize and play chords?
Okay. Let me reinforce what you said. I had this diagram I asked an artist to make for me. This is my teaching philosophy. The reading eye and the playing by ear. This is improvisation, playing by ear, working out chords. This is reading music. And my teaching philosophy, here's a keyboard, is that they're equal. That not only every lesson includes reading and improvising, but every practice session, every day. If you want to be a better musician, you will spend 50% of your time on either of these. And it is a complete myth that improvising jazz musicians are only play-by-ear people. I don't know a jazz musician in my long career who doesn't have a big stack of music books that they've read and played. So, but how do you get to do that? One way, to just do a little plug here, is to attend 88 Creative Keys workshop. It happens next month in July, and it's July 9 through 12. We have 6 slots left, and it is all about, that's exactly what we do, is teach teachers to teach off-page creativity.
That's awesome. Where can we, where is this being held?
Oh, it's in Denver. It starts on July 9th, and to learn more about it, the number's 88creativekeys.com.
Nice.
Is the place to head. So, but that's, the other way to do it is to realize that you do not need to be an expert to teach this. What you want to do is be a fellow explorer. You change your mindset from I'm the teacher and I know it all and you're an empty vessel to let's take this little chord progression and see what we can do with it together. It's a completely different mindset. You're a coach at best and a peer even better.
You just said something that really resonated with me, Bradley, and that is mindset. I think when you have a growth mindset and you're open to learning new things and being coachable, everything changes. And I want to share with you, I mentioned classically trained, did my ARCT, all of that. That was the box that I was in, and I love being in the box. But I had a very young student, an incredibly gifted student, and who challenged me, who wanted to just play outside the box and to be, improvising. So I had to learn the tools to provide him with these opportunities. And it was very important because A or B, either A, please send that student to someone who will give him what he needs, or B, come to 88 Creative Keys and learn how to do it. Number one, because it's really fun. And number two, because you're, enriching the lives of your students. And now that young student of mine, his name is Connor Dara, is a jazz giant. I mean, he's performing, composing. I mean, he's up on YouTube and all of this. And I'm like, I was his teacher, but I could not play what he plays. I mean, he's just a monster. He plays saxophone, he plays guitar, he plays piano. All of these things happened just because I gave him the crayons to start coloring. And so I think it's really encouraging to say, go to these conferences, learn more. You don't have to become the master, but you have to, attain the teaching tools so that you can help your students, because they may be the next Bradley Sowash. Who knows, right? Like you don't know where your young students are going to go.
Well, my hat's off to you that you did not have what many of us have. I call it classical baggage. Such a strong desire to protect our ego as teachers or even players, that we're unable to get out of that box. And a lot of us, as you described, that student challenged you. A lot of my, if you want to call it training, was the same kind of trial by fire, where I'm thrown onto a bandstand as a kid and I'm not sure what's going on, and I'm learning it on the spot. Fortunately, there are better resources, such as your wonderful books behind you, and I have the Creative Chords series and my That's Jazz books. There are resources that make that a little bit easier. Some people will argue that you can't learn improvisation from a book. I totally reject that. Again, because all the great improvisers I know have a good library.
Yes.
And knowledge is so much a part of it. It looks like we're just closing our eyes and playing intuitively, but underneath that is all this underpinning that fed that intuition with cognition.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said that, because oftentimes, there's a jazz legend, Lenny Breau, who is, sort of the monster of guitar, not alive anymore. But when my daughter Sherry, she's a music producer in Vegas, and multi-instrumentalist. And, you talked earlier about doing the piano versus the guitar. So Lenny Breau used to listen to piano and try to recreate those jazz chords on the guitar.
Mm.
And when Sherry was young, she didn't know about that. So she used to listen to the Lenny Breau jazz and then try to recreate that on the piano, which was kind of like, he just did that the other way. But I think when you explore that and you have that knowledge, because now if I listen to music, you almost know who's playing, don't you? Because they have those licks, they have those little pockets of like, they've developed those little techniques. I'm sure when you listen to music, you can say, I know who's playing that.
And a great example of that is the legend that we lost yesterday, Dr. John from New Orleans.
Yeah.
You can tell in 2 seconds that was him playing. And that's the ultimate goal of the improviser, is to find your own voice. Mm-hmm. But you got to get there through imitating and slowly integrating. The innovation only comes at the end of of a lot of years. So it's just fine to copy and explore.
Absolutely. Early on. Yeah, we've got a couple of questions for you. David, he says, I'm a disabled vet and lost the use of my legs. How important are the foot pedals?
It depends on, again, the kind of music you want to play. So actually, what came to mind is I'm often in my online jazz piano classes chiding my students to not over pedal, particularly in a swing environment. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of that sound in jazz that's and if we pedal that, of course, it's a big soup and it loses its clarity. So let's see if I can. Yes. No foot on the pedal. So there's a lot of yeah. If you're gonna play slow, beautiful music, probably pretty hard to pull off a ballad without a little pedal. Right. There are I'd have to look into this, but there are actually devices to pedal with your knees, and some of the earliest pianos had a knee pedal, not a floor pedal. So that might be something to look into.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a comment here from Faye Smith. She said, yes, Bradley. I had to change my mindset 30 years ago when I got asked to be in a local wedding band. No music, just chord charts. Now I make sure that my students can do this too. We love lead sheets. And Sheila says it's really interesting and really helpful info. Can you just elaborate a little on, what's a lead sheet and how can we get started with that?
Oh, I wish I had one here in front of me. The lead sheet is just the melody with the chord symbols written above it. And it is a deliberately vague outline of a tune in order to allow the musician to input their own ideas and arrangements. Mm-hmm. So the people who write a jazz lead sheet, for example, it's not that they're unsophisticated composers that are incapable of writing for, say, an 18-piece big band. Right. It's just that they want to leave the musician a lot of room for interpretation.
Right.
And I just wanted to touch on Faye Smith's comment. I know Faye, she's a fellow Buckeye, and she's a poster child for the kind of teacher that is very comfortable teaching to the eye and the ear. And I look for those. They're out there, and there's more and more of them. Years ago, I was at a music conference. My very first book, That's Jazz, came out, and the publisher asked me to sit in a chair at the end of the booth and ask people to, if they were interested in buying the book. And I had never been a salesperson. I didn't know how to do that. So I just said, as people walked by, I said, are you interested in teaching improvisation? Yeah. And several of them, 70% would say, maybe, let me look at it. Piano people tend to be nice. Yeah. But 20% of them were offended. They'd say, why, certainly not. As if it was asking them to be outrageous. And I've seen that change, that in part because of my own work, people like Forrest Kinney, Leela Viss, yourself, Glory, there's been Christopher Norton. It's hard to make a list because you're going to leave people out automatically. But there is a groundswell of recovering the creativity in our playing, and that's now there's a lot more interest in it than when I was starting to push this 20 years ago.
Yes. Well, even I know, well, because we're in with Tim Topham's Inner Circle, and just
I should have mentioned, yeah.
Yeah, of course. And with Tim Topham, I know, I watched one of his videos and he was talking about chords, and it was just how to do chord progressions, because it really does give students. And I think, one of the big things is that oftentimes music teachers say, oh, my students just want to quit. They're not interested, or, they're going to soccer and they don't have time for this. And I take really a lot of responsibility in my teaching. If I have a student who's not motivated, I think it's my fault. What am I doing? I think sometimes we need to reflect and maybe give them something like this. Maybe say, well, if you don't want to play those, classical pieces, you don't have to. It doesn't mean you have to play that. It's an option, and maybe we can delve deeper into analyzing those pieces. But if you just want to play something, give them something they love to learn, and those students will be lifetime learners. I talked about Connor earlier, and yes, he did finish his, level 8 Royal Conservatory piano. However, through his entire musical journey with me, even when he started, we always played a variety of music, which included improvisation. And I mean, he surpassed the teacher when it came to jazz improvisation because he worked at it and he loved it. So I think it's important to take that step. And I know what you mean about being the salesperson. Sometimes you think, do they really want this? But you're giving them that, Bradley. And without that, a lot of those teachers, they don't know where to start. So you're really providing a service.
Let me throw some out. You said you can play the classical if you'd like to, or you can do other kinds of music with the chords. And you mentioned analysis. And just another way you can go is actually to make the composers roll over in their graves. In other words, you can take those classical pieces and morph them. So suppose a lot of people know this. So if we actually put chord symbols above that, we'd have a G, G over B, C, and D. And maybe now we'll change the groove. So here we go. So
I love that.
It's just taking the same chords Bach wrote and exploring what he might have written if he lived now. So I call that jamming the classics. So it's another way to get at this whole mindset.
And I think that's just fantastic, because to learn it one way, and then, I talked about my daughter, Sherry, she actually was learning Fur-Elise, right? And then she turned it into an improvisation piece, and she called it Fur-Elise Goes Jazz.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and it was just, I realized then that was going to be her direction, because when you really,
I had to try it.
because it's just fun, Oh, everybody's going, cool. David has one more question. He says, is it better to let a child just play with the piano for a period of time prior to starting lessons? My thought on that one, I can tell you, my young daughter started lessons. She was 2 years old, and I'm all about, providing education. I mean, you can start at any age, but I personally think that when you start when you're younger, that's when your mind is more open. You're almost more open to listening and learning. Sometimes we have adults and they're like afraid to well, did I do that right? Whereas kids just play. What are your thoughts on that question, Bradley? Should they play, just let them do their own thing? Or what is an age when you would say, hey, let me help you out with that?
I think that I'm not an expert on early childhood music education, but I think being around somebody who plays rubs off for sure. And when the kid's reaching up and trying that, that's wonderful. It leads me actually into a related point, which is I think that initially it's great when student musicians learn improvisation in an exploratory way. So if the teacher is laying down a little pattern, and a lot of my buddy Forrest Kinney's pattern play and puzzle play books do this, where he has a teacher part and you work out on the black keys. Just whatever, exploring.
Right.
However, that's only opens the door.
Yes.
So very soon, I have a rule for my own teaching, and I do no longer teach beginners, that I never ask a student to play something they don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to realize what's going, so that we aren't just having a fun time or learning a tune, but we're actually taking away creative concepts that we can apply to all kinds of tunes.
Yes. And I think, you really said something important too, is that we need to teach to our strengths, to continue learning as educators, but also to teach to our strengths. I taught music for young children for over 20 years. And so, of course, my students, were starting when they were 3 years old with me in the program. And I love that part of it. Now I'm teaching more. Obviously, I'm actually teaching less because obviously I'm running the ultimate music theory business. But I think that we go through different stages in our life too, where we might want to say, you know what, I think it's just time. I want to learn how to play jazz for my own enjoyment. And then I want to take a few of my students and work with them and do that. I have a question for you, Bradley. What actually motivated you to start your musical journey and your business so that you could help other people?
Well, I got tired of being tied down by written notes. My parents were big band. My mother was a big band singer. My father was a trumpet player, just in a small casual band, no big stars or anything like that. And we had jam sessions in our living room, where we pull out all these brass instruments. And I remember my dad handed me a trombone and saying, buzz in here and slide around till it sounds good. It was awful. We had a little bit dumb percussion instruments, but it was so much fun. Mm-hmm. And then I'd go to my tedious piano lessons, and it was all about rigor and exactitude. And I did not understand why there was such a disconnect between my music education and the joy of making music.
Yeah,
I actually snuck around for a bunch of years playing it, not my assignment, and playing in little rock bands and jamming with my friends, and it was all sneaky, and I'm a good guy, so I felt like a bad boy. I wasn't doing my music studies.
Yeah.
And then I ended up making a career out of it. That said, I did absolutely just quit lessons at one point because of it. I couldn't take it. Mm-hmm. And I had to do some makeup with my reading. In my early 20s, my reading was pretty bad. So I was able to compensate for that. But in hindsight, I find it much harder for recovering classical pianists to learn to improvise.
Yes.
Than for improvisers to learn to read. If you've got that musicality that's early on, it helps a lot. It's never easy though. Music's hard. So be nice to yourselves when you learn it.
Yeah, for sure. I think so. What do you, in connecting with other teachers, and obviously, you attend a lot of conferences and people are coming to your live events. What do you see as the one thing that's maybe missing from today's teaching techniques, just to really honestly help students?
That's it. And one thing, if it was in one word, I would call it, improvisation, which includes playing by ear, making up your own tunes. It also means just embellishing tunes, simply adding a few extra notes. My friend Lee Levis has a great comment about how to get started. She says, add something, change something. That's, so it's what's missing is, let me say something. The notes on a page are of all equal density. They all have blackness to a certain degree, that so that they appear to your eye to be equally important. Yeah. But they aren't equally important. Some notes are on the way notes to the more important ones, and some of them are notated little fills and things. And when you have that perfection of clearly black and white notes, there's a sense of, I must do this exactly as it's written. But the fact is, some of those are just shady on the way notes, and others aren't. And I can give you an example. So let's take this Chopin waltz. So that's the important notes, and what he did was decorate that. This is a plain old B minor and F sharp chord, and he has some sort of in-between notes. And that's more how music is played. That's more how it's expressive. And you don't discover that by looking at it. You discover that by messing with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that you've really shared with us today, Bradley, so many opportunities to really just step outside our comfort zone and learn more, explore, because we're asking our students to do that at every lesson. We say, hey, I'm going to teach you something today, and maybe it's time for us. And I think too, almost when you do the same thing all the time, you get bored with yourself. You know, you get bored with teaching the same thing the same way, and you can imagine your students are getting bored learning the same thing the same way. And in talking to you today, I really want to take that step in that journey, because I think I can offer my students more joy. And I love that you use that word, because that's what it's about, is the joy of learning music, not just like, oh, I have to go to my piano lessons. You know, it should be, oh, I can't wait. I don't want to miss. I got to go. I got to get to my piano lessons. So how can we connect and learn more about you and your materials and the resources?
Yeah, so it's bradleysowash.com, BradleySowash. And I'd like to invite the viewers here to, because of the timing of this, I have just started my summer online jazz piano class.
Nice.
And we are learning, it's called Take 5. We're learning 2 tunes and 5 lessons, each with the word 5 in it. So one of them is 5 Foot 2 Eyes of Blue. The other one is Take 5, the Dave Brubeck. And I do those in live lessons where the viewers are either right there with me on screen, or some people can just watch if they prefer not to be on camera. And the reason it's a good place to start is that the summer courses are shorter, less expensive, and you can even sign up for a replay of a trial lesson I did last week, just to see how it works and see if it's a fit for you.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to do is twist somebody's arm and get into a situation where they're not comfortable. So I'd encourage you to check that out, just because June 12th is the next real lesson where we're gathering and learning the next steps. So.
Right. So perfect timing today. They can definitely jump in there and enjoy all of that. So today we've learned about how to develop chord fluency. I'd love our listeners to just put a little note in the chat box. What was your biggest takeaway today? What have you learned that you want to share with Bradley? Even if it's just thanks, Bradley, I learned a lot. Faye says, Bradley's classes are so great. Do it, do it, do it. Diane says, love Chopin. I think you've really served our community today, Bradley. And I just want to say a big thank you for joining me. It's been a delight. I hope to see you again. We don't have to wait another however many years before we get back to Texas, but maybe you'll come up to Canada and do a presentation up here. That would be fantastic as well.
All it takes is an invitation.
There you go. You're officially invited. We'll make it happen. Thanks again. Go to bradleysowash.com. So Bradley, BRADLEY, Sowash, SOWASH.com. Have I got that right, Bradley?
You sure do.
Yay. Okay. Thanks for joining me, everybody, and have a fantastic day. And make sure you do some improvising. That's the way to have fun, some fun there. Thanks. Have a great day.